Star Trek The Original Series, Season 1 episode The Devil in the Dark, premiered on March 8, 1967. It was episode number 25, directed by Joseph Pevney, written and produced by Gene L. Kuhn. The associate producer would be Robert H. Justman. Ken Lynch would play Chief Engineer Vandenberg. Biff Elliott would play Schmitter. Brad Weston would play Appel. Barry Russo would play Giotto, and other guest stars would include George E. Allen and John Cavett. Alexander Courage would compose as well as conduct the music, and D.C. Fontana would be the script consultant. The episode would begin inside of planet Janus 6. This is where we see Schmitter, who is a miner in the production station. He appears to be looking for something. He would be checked on by Chief Vandenberg, who was the head of the station. He said to Vandenberg, "Whatever this thing is, it's already killed 50 people. He appeared scared, and the chief reminded him that they had to have guards posted. He asked about the Enterprise coming, and the chief assured him that she was. No sooner did the chief and the rest of the team leave when Schmitter would turn to face the monster. He would let out a scream, which would be heard by the chief and his team. They would hurry back to discover what was left of the guard. Chief Vandenberg would look down and say, "Schmitter, like the rest of them, burned to a crisp." On Stardate 3196.1, the Enterprise would be answering the distress call from the station. It would come from the Per Diem production station deep inside of Janus 6. Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, and Dr. McCoy would beam down to the station to meet with the Chief Engineer Vandenberg, who was the administrative head of Janus 6. Once in Vandenberg's office, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy would be told about a monster. Kirk would ask when it had started, and Vandenberg would reply that 3 months ago the sensors gave unusually rich Per Diem readings, also uranium, cerium, and platinum. Vandenberg stated that the whole planet was a treasure house, and Kirk would note that if mining conditions were so difficult, Janus 6 could supply the mineral needs of 1,000 planets. Kirk would ask what happened. Vandenberg would go on to say, first, the automatic machinery, piece by piece, started to almost disintegrate. Metal began dissolving away. There was no reason for it, and our chemists were unable to analyze the corrosive agent. Vandenberg would later state, "I don't know what this monster is, but I know what it's doing." He would say that their maintenance engineer was sent down to fix it, and he would be found seared to a crisp. Mr. Spock would rule out volcanic activity. The chief would add that the deaths were starting to work their way up to the main levels. In fact, the last death occurred 2 days ago, 3 levels below the one that they were on. Roberts would then take Dr. McCoy to show him the remains of the miner. Ed Appel would claim to have seen the monster. He said that he hit it with a clean shot with his phaser, and it didn't even slow it down. Appel would go on to say that the creature was big and shaggy. Finally, Vandenberg would say that production has stopped. No one would even go down into the lower levels, and he didn't blame them. He would add, if the Federation wanted Per Diem, then you have to do something about it. Kirk would add, well, that is why we're here. Kirk would later ask Chief Vandenberg for a complete subsurface chart with all the grifts, galleries, and tunnels. Vandenberg said that he would get it. Mr. Spock would inquire about a round-shaped object on Vandenberg's desk. The chief would answer saying that it was a silicone nodule. There were 1 million of them down there, no commercial value. Mr. Spock said it was a geological oddity, and he asked if it was only made of pure silicone. Vandenberg responded with a few other trace elements, then barked that they did not call the Enterprise to come down and collect rocks. Upon returning, Dr. McCoy would tell Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock that Schmitter didn't burn to death, not in the usual way anyway. There were only fragments of bone and teeth left, but he died of chemical corrosion, almost as though he had been thrown into a vat of extremely corrosive acid. Strong enough to eat away machinery? Kirk asked. McCoy replied, strong enough to eat anything else you can think of. Vandenberg would inform Captain Kirk that the charts were less than a year old, and Kirk would later say that they were unable to cover every tunnel on foot, and they must get production going again. We must get that per diem. Mr. Spock would suggest trying to initiate an encounter with the creature. However, Vandenberg would snap. When that creature appears, men die. Mr. Spock had said that no other life forms were registering on his sensors except the miners. Captain Kirk would ask, what about abnormal life forms? Before Mr. Spock could answer, the alarm would sound. Something's happening in the reactor room, shouted Chief Vandenberg. He bent down and pushed the button and opened the door, and they all ran out of the office. Once down at the reactor room, Vandenberg would point out that the seared remains of the attacked miner. Dr. McCoy would investigate further. Mr. Spock told Captain Kirk that the hole in the reactor room door was made by a highly corrosive acid that had traces of it that may linger. Vandenberg called to Kirk from inside the room and informed him that the main circulating pump for the entire reactor was gone. He would later say that without the pump mechanism, the reactor could go supercritical and poison half the planet. Spock would note that it was the same corrosive material that had burned a hole in the door. Vandenberg added that he couldn't shut down a reactor because it provided heat and air and life support for the whole colony. A PXK per GM reactor? Asked Mr. Scott. No, sir, we don't have a circulating pump parts for a reactor like that. I haven't seen a PXK in 20 years. Can you rig one up? Asked Kirk. It's vital. Scotty would say that he could put together some odds and ends, and it may hold 48 hours with a bit of luck. Kirk would say that 48 hours is better than nothing, and to get what he needed and beam down. He added it was top priority. Vandenberg asked what would happen after the 48 hours. Kirk would say that hopefully they would have found the circulating pump by then. The alternative was evacuating the miners up to the Enterprise. Later, Mr. Spock would theorize that the pump was not taken by accident. You mean the creature is trying to push the colony off the planet? Asked Kirk. But why now? These facilities have been in operation for over 50 years. I don't know, answered Spock. But life as we know it is universally based on some combination of carbon compounds. But what if life exists based on other elements? For instance, silicon. Dr. McCoy said he was talking fantasy. However, Captain Kirk said that it was a possibility, and that would be what the creature was not affected by Phaser 1, which was less powerful than Phaser 2. Kirk theorized that such a creature could tunnel through and move easily through solid rock and have heavy armor plating. Mr. Spock suggested that Phaser 1, which is what the colony used, would be useless. Kirk said, but we have Phaser 2. Spock added that he could make modifications to it to be more effective against silicon. Dr. McCoy would say the silicone-based life was physiologically impossible, especially in an oxygen atmosphere. Despite Dr. McCoy's objections, Captain Kirk would order Spock to assemble a team with Lieutenant Commander Giotto, assemble the troops, and arm them with Phaser number 2. You make the proper adjustments. Mr. Spock would continue to be fascinated by the silicone rock on Vandenberg's desk. Captain Kirk would comment as such. Spock would tell him that he has already given Dr. McCoy sufficient cause for amusement. I would prefer to conjugate the possibilities for a time. Later we see Mr. Scott down in the reactor room, working on a makeshift circulator pump. When Captain Kirk asked for a status report, he would inform the captain that it was a plumber's nightmare, but it'll hold for a bit. Kirk said it has to last longer than a bit. Scotty would reply, sorry, sir. It's the best that I can do, but I guarantee that isn't good enough. Later in Chief Vandenberg's office, Kirk would address the security team. Kirk would say the creature was highly resistant to phaser fire. He instructed the team to use the highest settings on their phasers. Also, he said the creature may or may not attack on sight. However, you must. Kirk would say that they had already been 50 deaths and he wanted no more. Mr. Spock would later ask Chief Vandenberg at what level did they find the silicone nodules at. Vandenberg would inform him that they first found them on a 23rd level. Upon hearing that, Captain Kirk would instruct Giotto to start their search at the 23rd level. Later, while searching the tunnels, Mr. Spock would adjust his tricorder to register for silicon-based life. He would register a life form bearing 111 degrees, elevation 4 degrees. Spock would then confirm the life form to be silicone-based. We then see the Enterprise security guard as he is exploring the caves. Suddenly, he is attacked. Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock hear the scream and immediately are at the scene. Spock notices a phaser on the ground beside the charred remains. He never even had a chance to fire, Spock said. Spock would later notice a tunnel. He told Kirk that it was made within the hour, moments ago in fact. "Are you certain?" asked Kirk. "This tunnel goes back as far as the eye can see. Our best machinery couldn't cut a tunnel like this, even with phasers." Kirk and Spock would then hear something behind them. They would turn to face the creature for the first time. They would both fire their phasers at the same spot on the creature. The creature would immediately retreat and disappear down a tunnel. Spock would comment on the speed in which the creature could travel. They would then notice a piece of the creature that had been cut off by their phasers. Kirk asked Mr. Spock for an analysis. Spock would say that, in his opinion, it was fibrous asbestos, a mineral. Kirk would then confirm Spock's theory of a silicone-based life form. Spock would go on to say that we are dealing with a silicone creature of the deep rocks, capable of moving through solid rock as we are able to move through the open air. He later added that the creature's body secretes a powerful corrosive. Captain Kirk told Lieutenant Commander Giotto that they had their phasers on full power and adjusted for silicone, yet the creature was only wounded and not killed. Kirk would later say that we knew it was a killer. Now it is wounded, probably back there, in pain, and is nothing more dangerous than a wounded animal. Mr. Spock would later inform the captain that all the men were accounted for, with just one creature bearing 201. Mr. Spock would later say that it is possible that the creature was the last of its kind, and to kill it would be a crime against science. Kirk would remind Spock that they were not on a zoological expedition. "I'm sorry, Mr. Spock," said Captain Kirk. "The creature must die." Kirk would later address the search team in the main tunnel. He informed them the creature was wounded and even more dangerous. He instructed the team to stay in pairs. He also said to concentrate their phase of power on what appears to be, or would appear to be, the head. Concentrate it and maintain it. The creature is resistant, but it can be hurt, and if it can be hurt, it can be killed. Spock would instruct the men to surround it, possibly capture it. Kirk would immediately say, "Your orders are shoot to kill. Protect yourselves at all times." Kirk would later inform Mr. Spock that the creature was to be killed on sight, that he would not lose more men. Kirk would order Mr. Spock to assist Scotty. He would later say that either one of them were expendable, but not both of them. He did not want the possibility of losing both of them to the creature. However, Mr. Spock would counter by saying the odds of both of them being killed were 2,228.7 to 1. So he ended up staying. Mr. Scott would later inform the captain that his makeshift circulator pump had failed. Kirk would order the evacuation of the personnel to the Enterprise. Only Chief Vandenberg and some key personnel would stay behind. Scotty told Kirk the reactor would go supercritical in 10 hours and that he had that much time to find the part. Kirk would order Chief Vandenberg to assemble his men and meet him at level 23, checkpoint Tiger. Kirk would instruct them to stay paired with Enterprise personnel and to keep them in sight at all times. Later, while searching, Kirk and Spock would separate, each taking a tunnel. It would converge at its ends. Kirk would tell Mr. Spock via communicator that he found thousands of silicone nodules. Mr. Spock mentioned to him that he would advise against damaging them. As the creature passed Captain Kirk, a small cave-in occurred, blocking the way he came into the area. The tunnels would meet further down, so Kirk said that they could meet up there, where it was not a necessity for Spock to phaser him out. No sooner did Kirk finish his sentence when he noticed the wall of the tunnel starting to glow red hot. The creature would then make an appearance in front of him. He would aim his phaser at it and it would immediately back away. Later, Mr. Spock would signal Kirk and inform him of fresh readings within the area. He asked if Captain Kirk wanted him to take fresh readings. Captain Kirk would inform him that the readings weren't necessary because he knew where the creature was. "Where?" Spock asked. 10 feet in front of me," Kirk replied. "Kill it, Captain," quickly Spock said. Kirk noted that it was not being aggressive towards him. He later asked, "Wasn't it you that wanted to keep it alive? Capture it if possible?" "Well, what do we do?" Kirk later asked the creature. "Just talk it over?" The creature would respond by turning itself around, showing the wound that Kirk and Spock inflicted with their phasers. Kirk would say, "Well, you can be hurt, can't you?" "We just sit here? It's your move," Kirk said. When Spock arrived, he immediately drew his phaser. "No, no," Kirk shouted. "Come on over, Mr. Spock, it's okay." "Fascinating," said Spock. "It didn't make any moves against you." "No," Kirk said. "It seems to be waiting. I tried talking to it, but it didn't do any good." Spock pointed out all the silicon nodules surrounding them. Kirk asked Spock if it meant anything to him. "Yes, possibly the answer, Captain." Spock would then suggest the joining of the minds. Kirk would say that he knew it was a terrible lowering of personal barriers, but if there was a chance. Once making contact, Spock would scream and indicate that the creature was in tremendous pain. Once he broke the meld, he told Kirk that the creature was in agony. The creature would then go for a small rock shelf, climb up on top, and burn the words into the rock. Upon backing away, Kirk would read the words, "No kill I." He asked if that was a plea for them not to kill it, or if it was a promise that it would not kill them. "I don't know," said Spock. "Evidently it gained an immediate knowledge of us from its empathy with me." Spock would go on to say that it was an intelligent, highly sophisticated animal in great pain, but not reacting normally how a wounded animal would act. It calls itself a Horta. "Mr. Spock, we need that retardation mechanism." Mr. Spock would then tell how it has no reason to help them, and every reason to wish them off the planet. Captain Kirk would call down to Dr. McCoy to try to help the Horta. Kirk asked Spock to reestablish communication and asked the Horta why it suddenly took to murder. Mr. Spock would say for that type of communication it would be necessary to touch it. Once Spock reestablished contact through touching the Horta, Kirk would inform Giotto that no one else was to come down to their level, only to allow Dr. McCoy through once he got there. "Murderers! Devils!" Spock would growl. "Eternity ends. The chamber of the ages. The altar of tomorrow. Murderers! Stop them!" Spock continued to express the emotions of the Horta as Kirk watched on. "Kill! Strike back! Monsters!" Dr. McCoy would enter the area and approach Captain Kirk. "What's Spock doing?" he asked. Kirk would respond, "It's wounded, hurt bad. You've got to help." After a brief examination, Dr. McCoy would tell Captain Kirk, "You can't be serious. That thing is virtually made of stone." Kirk said, "Help it. Treat it." "I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer," said McCoy. "You're a healer. It's a patient, and that's an order," Kirk said. Kirk would say to Spock, "Tell it we're trying to help," and ask about the mechanism. "Understood," said Spock. "It's the end of life. Eternity stops," cried Spock. "Go out into the tunnel, to the chamber of the ages. Cry for the children. Walk carefully in the vault of tomorrow. Sorrow for the murdered children. The thing you search for is there. Go. Go. Sense for the end of things. Go into the tunnel. There is a passageway. Quick. Kirk would follow the tunnel into a chamber. He would notice many of the nodules that had been destroyed. He would find a circulator pump and return. It is time to sleep. It is over, said Spock. Failure. The murderers have won. Death is welcome. Let it end here. Captain Kirk would call Spock out of the connection with the Horta. He told him he had found the pump along with millions of the nodules. They're eggs, aren't they? Yes, Captain, answered Spock, and about to hatch. The miners must have broken into the hatchery, said Kirk. The operations destroyed thousands. Meanwhile, at the top, Vandenberg's men attacked Giotto's men and broke through on their way down to level 23 to where Kirk, Spock, and McCoy were. Once there, Appel and Vandenberg led the way. Chief Vandenberg raised his phaser and aimed, while Appel yelled, "Kill it!" "The first one who fires is dead," Kirk yelled. Vandenberg yelled and pointed. "That thing killed 50 of my men." "And you've killed thousands of her children," Kirk snapped back. "What?" asked the chief. "Those round silicone nodules you've been collecting and destroying? They're her eggs. Tell them, Mr. Spock." Spock would say there have been many generations of Horta on this planet. Every 50,000 years the entire race dies, all but this one. Like this one. But the eggs live. She cares for them, protects them, and when they hatch, she is the mother to them, thousands of them. The creature here is mother to her race. Kirk would then add, the Horta is intelligent and peaceful, mild. She had no objection to sharing this planet with you until you broke into her nursery and started destroying her eggs. Then she fought back the only way she knew how, as any mother would when her children are in danger. "We didn't know. How could we?" said Chief Vandenberg. Kirk would later give Vandenberg back the circulating pump. He would go on to say, "You have complained that this planet is a mineralogical treasure house if you only had the equipment to get at it. Gentlemen, the Horta moves through rock the way we move through air and leaves tunnels. They tunnel and you collect," Kirk would later suggest. "Sounds okay if it will work," replied Chief Vandenberg. "Except for one thing," Spock would add. "The Horta is badly injured. It may die." "It won't die," said Dr. McCoy. He said, "By golly, Jim, I think I may be able to cure a rainy day." "Can you help it?" asked Kirk. "Help it?" replied McCoy. "I cured it." He would later say that he had the ship beam down 100 pounds of the thermal concrete that they build temporary shelters out of, mostly silicon. So I just trolled it into the wound, and it'll act as a Band-Aid until it heals. Later, Mr. Spock would reestablish communication with the Horta and present the situation and see if she would be willing to live in peace with the miners, along with her children. They tunnel, and the miners collect the minerals. Back on board the Enterprise, Chief Vandenberg would inform Captain Kirk that some of the eggs have already begun to hatch. He said the first things the little devils do is to start tunneling. "We've already hit huge Pergeum deposits. I'm afraid to tell you how much gold and platinum and rare earths we've uncovered." Kirk would reply, "I'm glad to hear that, Chief. Once Mother Horta tells her children what to look for, you people are going to be embarrassingly rich." Vandenberg would end by saying the Horta aren't so bad once you get used to their appearance. After he signed off, Mr. Spock had remarked that the Horta said the same thing about humans to him. Spock said she thought humans were revolting in appearance, but she thought she could get used to it. "Oh, did she?" said Dr. McCoy. "Tell me, did she happen to make any comment about those ears?" Spock pondered. "Not directly. However, I got the impression that she found them the most attractive of all human characteristics of all." He later said he did not have the heart to tell her that only Vulcans possessed them.